Good evening, everyone. I'm Bill McCarran. I'm the director of the Press Freedom Center at the National Press Club, a new organization in the press freedom space. And I'm so glad that you all join us tonight and hear this great panel. We're here to talk about a new and final work by Dom Phillips, How to Save the Amazon, A Journalist's Fatal Quest for Answers. And it's an extraordinary work by an extraordinary journalist in a very hopeful story in that his family and his colleagues came together to ensure that this book is published posthumously using his work in many of the chapters and then picking up on notes and so forth to produce their own compendium, additional work. And it's a very, very powerful story. It reminds us the danger journalists put themselves in to do their jobs. It tells us a great deal about the Amazon and how important the Amazon is in all of our lives. And it tells us a lot about Dom, and it's really the work of the others in the book that helped us, the other authors that helped us see him in a very complete and interesting way. So we're grateful to be joined by three very special guests. Alessandro Sampaio, this is Dom's wife and a powerful voice in the book. We have Andrew Fishman, a journalist with The Intercept. He's based in Brazil, just in from Brazil. And his work continues to shine a light on Dom with passionate coverage of those kind of issues in the region. And Stephanie Nolan, a global health reporter for the New York Times, who has deep expertise in Latin America and the Global South from her more than 30 years reporting on the region. Sorry about that, Stephanie. I should have just left a number off there, but
it's all right. I'm proud of it.
It is pretty good. And so a couple of housekeeping things. You'll find cards around here. If you want to ask a question, jot it down on the card. Julie, I think, will pick it up from you, or you can just hand it up to me, and we'll ask those. This is being recorded, so we're going to have it'll be streamed tomorrow on the website. So if you want people to see it, you can just point them toward the Press Club's website, and that will work. And then we do have limited copies of Dom's book for sale. So if you haven't read it yet and you want to read it, and you should, Julie will come help you with that. Okay, so let's get started. I said I thought this was a hopeful book, but I'm also going to say the problems that Dom faced and that you all know so well in the Amazon region, they're daunting. There seem to not be solutions. So the hopefulness of the form of the book that you guys are picking up his work is sort of contrasted with the difficult problems that Dom was working on, that you all are working on. That was my takeaway on it. Throughout the book, though, his passion for these issues and for finding some kind of solutions for these issues comes through loud and clear. I just want to take a second. Maybe we'll start down there with you, Stephanie, and come back. What are you're participants in the book, but what are your thoughts about the book, some of you?
Well, I think it is a hopeful, it's a devastating book, and I think for all of us who worked on it, nobody wanted to be doing this,
Yep.
right? The person who should have finished this book is Dom, right? And so very fundamentally, it's outrageous that this had to happen and that this is a journalist who was killed for trying to tell a story, right? So sort of point one, but it was hopeful for me, and I think Andrew and I would say the same thing, the community of people that formed around the book. And it started, just for people who may not know the backstory, I certainly remember, I'm sure you do, Andrew, the day that Dom didn't check in the day he went missing, the text messages started between those of us who were correspondents in Brazil or had been recently, and a sort of community of people formed on that day, and it's still the community of people now who are broadly engaged in trying to make sure that people hear Dom's story. So there's a hopefulness to that. But I think the hopeful quality that you're talking about in the book, and you're right, like it is, you know, even though there's been a significant change in government in Brazil, the perils of the Amazon that Dom was writing about are far from over. The problems that he was describing remain and are monumental, and that is, I think, kind of, you can feel paralyzed in the face of that, but I think what the hope comes from the fact of what Dom was doing, which was we tend to, especially in the global north, think about the Amazon as trees and saving trees, right? Maybe an ecosystem. And we don't think of it as people, right? I mean, I'm a Canadian. More humans live in the Amazon than live in Canada, right? And so the pressures on the Amazon come from those people. And so the solutions to that problem start with those people. And Dom was interested in helping us understand who those people were and what kind of pressures were driving the degradation of the Amazon, but also what has to happen for the people for there to be a solution, right? And I think when you root that story in the people and not just amorphous trees, I think that it becomes a hopeful story. There's potential in that story, right?
Yes, there are characters in the story, and he's able to bring them out and tell the story through people. Andrew, did you want to?
Sure. Journalists are known to sometimes be a bit cynical, and I don't think that was the case for Dom. I think that he was actually rather optimistic, realistic, but optimistic. And the reason why he called his book How to Save the Amazon, and the reason why he did this book, is because he believed that this was possible. Otherwise, he wouldn't have done it. He would have spent his time doing something else. But he felt that this was the most important story in Brazil and one of the most important stories in the world at the moment. And he knew that certain things needed to change very quickly if we are going to be able to save the Amazon, because I'm sure everyone's aware there's this concept of a tipping point of after you reach so much deforestation that the ecosystem will basically collapse on itself, and it will go from a rainforest to a savanna, possibly even to a desert. And if that were to happen, it would be just absolutely catastrophic. And so that is why we need to be asking this question, how to save the Amazon, and that's why he decided to do the book. And I would say that there's actually a lot of solutions, and some of them are quite easy, some of them are quite difficult, but the thing that's usually causing the barrier there is politics, right? It's this quest for profit, it's control and power, and the amount of profit that is derived from all the extractive industries that are destroying the Amazon right now are relatively so minuscule in the grand sense of the global economy, even the national economy of Brazil. And for the banks, the international banks that are based in London and the US and wherever, it's just a fraction of a percent of their profits. They really do not need this money, but it's part of this larger question. So you can look at this book, and I think the book does this. You can look at this issue from zooming in at the longest focal length of your camera and going all the way out, and there's all these different angles that you can look at it. And at some of those angles, everything looks so obvious and so simple and so easy. And then you zoom in or you zoom out, and it's just incredibly complex and difficult. And that's because people are, as Stefan was talking about, and that's why you need to look at this from the point of view of the people, because often it's much more nuanced and interesting than you would believe just on a surface level. Often the people that are now most dedicated to saving the Amazon are people that had been doing much of the destruction. A lot of people they're doing the saving also might have some cattle that they're ranching, and it's for completely logical reasons. They're not villains. And so that's what I think Dom wanted to do. He wanted to make people care a little bit as much as he cared. He wanted to get these stories of the people that are already making these solutions a reality. And he wanted to get the attention on this issue that it deserves, because we are running out of time. to make the changes that are completely doable before it's too late.
Thank you. Well said. Oh, Alessandra, so tell us, among the people in the book is Dom, of course. So tell us about Dom.
Yeah, and I used to say that Dom is not just interested about the information and the solutions. They care a lot about people. Mm-hmm. And he had this bond connection with Amazonian people and people who protect the Amazon. So I think that the point of this book, for me, very impressive, is he understood the importance to try to develop the solutions from Amazonian people, from their thinking, their way of life, their knowledge, ancestral knowledge. And I can't add that every time Don returned to home, he said to me, Ale, I'm quite sure if people know more about Amazon, people will care about how to protect, they will engage to protect. Because it's amazing, it's not just beautiful, but the potential of rainforest and the knowledge of these people. So I think that Don want to make this affective connection to the readers and everyone that read this book, and don't want to make the bridge of this knowledge, rainforest knowledge, ancestral, to outside. And I think this is very powerful because he say, Beto Maruba is one indigenous leader from Javari Valley, when Don talk about the project of the book and the title, How to Save the Amazon. And Beto Maruba say, oh, come on, man, you are foreign. You have no idea how to save it.
Yeah.
He say, yeah, this is a provocative title for people just engage and be interested about this subject. And I think it is. And maybe if people engage in this cause, understand the importance of Amazon and its people, maybe the society can pressure to good laws, environmental laws, to pressure on big companies, to understand the supply chain. It's very important to be this transparency, the supply chains, because we are directly affecting rainforest with our way of life, our way of life. So we have to know more about this. We need good quality information to know more about the subject.
Yeah, I'm remembering that conversation where Dom was warned, oh, you're from the outside. But in that same section, what they're saying is all of the processes, and Andrew was talking a little bit about this, that are being enacted in the Amazon now, whether it's the farming practices or the mining practices, or even there's a story about a dam that hydroelectric dam that went terribly wrong. All of these are sort of European model imposed ways of looking at land treatment and water treatment and that sort of thing. And none of them have worked out particularly well. And so what does seem to be the missing piece, and this comes through in the book, is the voice that is not often enough at the table are the people whose ancestors have been there for a long time. And now we're trying to return as much as possible within reason to wilderness or refuge, and for all kinds of reasons. And the indigenous people seem to be the best potential stewards of that stuff. So certainly if there's a big success in this book, it could be having more voices at the table there. And I know there's a lot of struggle for that, but I felt it was hopeful. And I felt reading it that he was an agent, for all of us down there. I mean, he was a journalist, but he was working for your kids and your neighbors and, it's one planet. And this is our, challenge of climate change. And it's not all on the Amazon, but a big part of what can change is there.
And we are destroying even before even really know it, because we know, for example, now the scientist is searching about the impacts in the rainforest,
Yes.
in the problems with dry seasons, but we don't know the effects in the ocean, for example.
Yes.
You know what I mean? We are destroying. It's so nonsense. And we are ignoring the ancestral knowledge that people that live in thousands and thousands years in harmony with nature.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that we can potentialize our modern knowledge and the technology, the nature technology, because nature has technology and there's ancestral knowledge, and could be so amazing for us, discover so many things.
God, the biodiversity holds lots of potential. Did either one of you want to talk about that?
Well, I guess one of the things that I was thinking about when you were talking about it is that one of the things that I really admired about Dom was that he went into things with an open mind, and he was a pretty relentless questioner.
Certainly was.
And you could get pinned by those eyes and really just grilled about something if you knew about something he wanted to know about. And I think you can do a kind of surface analysis of how to save the Amazon that can be like, there can be almost sometimes an exoticization of indigenous people and indigenous people's knowledge, and an assumption of that, indigenous people will protect the forest and they have some, and one of the things you realize when you report there is that there is, a wide diversity of indigenous peoples and a wide diversity of perspectives among indigenous people, and no monolithic belief about what the right approach is, right? And I went to, in the course of a day on the Xingu River in a boat, like a series of different indigenous communities who all held different opinions about what should happen with the gold mine that was, a few hundred kilometers up the river. So I think it is important to recognize historical, people's historical connection to the land that they're on, to the incredible, just the near genocidal action that's been taken against indigenous people in the forest, but also that there is a diversity of opinions around what the right thing forward, including what the economic models are and how extractive those models are, and how are you going to find livelihoods for people. And the flip side of what Andrew was saying about the kinds of profit you're talking about being minuscule, the daily wages of the people who do the actual forest destruction, right? The itinerant gold miners, the Grilaging, the Garimperos, it's you're working for $10, $15 a day, right? These are not sustainable livelihoods for people. And if you get paid to deforest, it's a statistic a friend of mine who's reporting in the Amazon now told me the other day, it costs $300,000 to deforest an area the size of a soccer field. It's deforestation is expensive, but the people who got paid to operate the bulldozers that did that work, when it's over, don't have jobs anymore, right? And they're going to go on to the next thing. And so there's you need a larger level of thinking about sustainability of livelihoods that is a lot more complex than just indigenous people will manage it. And what are you going to do? You're going to relocate the other 31 million people? What? So, and I feel like that's a thing that Dom, he was very keen to learn from the Guardians and the Javeri, who he was with on that last reporting trip, but also from everybody else who saw the multifaceted aspects of the economics of this, right? And it's complicated. And the book makes it clear that it's complicated, and Dom had arrived at that understanding by reporting there. Just went into it curious and saw the complexity of it.
Yeah. This book's about choices, right? There's so many choices that are made at the highest levels and at the lowest levels, and so many of the choices of the people in the Amazon that are doing this destructive work for $10 or $15 a day, they're doing it because that is basically the only option that they have, or the best option they have within their circumstances, is to take care of their families. And they're making a rational choice, oftentimes knowing that it is not a choice that's
Sustainable
actually
for the
good
long
for
term.
their families and their communities long term, but for this week, we need to eat.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure that we can, pay for medicine. And that is a choice at a political level, because you have hundreds of billions of dollars every year in subsidies that are going to big agro, to cattle. Cattle is responsible for 80 to 90% of the deforestation in the Amazon, to mining, to petroleum. And that money is subsidizing these industries that are most destroying our world, not just the Amazon. While you have communities, and I write about one of them in my chapter, that MST, the Marxist peasant movement, landless peasant movement, that's the biggest in the world of its kind. Very remarkable story that they had. And they took over this land that was unproductive cattle farm, and they all raised cattle because they didn't have title, they didn't have capital, and it was made for raising cattle. And they didn't, they weren't sure if they were going to be dispossessed. They had been dispossessed all the time. It took 9 years to get the title. Now they're in this area that's all for cattle, but it's becoming increasingly difficult to actually make the money because it's becoming so dry, because the climate is changing. They want to do agroforestry, which is more sustainable, and mixed crops and all these different trees and plants.
Vanilla. There's all the money in vanilla.
Sure, acai, fruit, and you can use it to feed the local economy instead of the global economy. But where's the subsidies for that? The amount of money that goes to small agriculture is just minuscule in comparison to what these big industries are going. And in fact, quite often, per acre, agroforestry is actually more profitable than these alternatives, which is another one of these crazy ironies, and also one of the choices that needs to be examined, and it is examined in the book.
And to say that successive Brazilian governments of all political orientations continue to do this, right? This massive subsidization of particularly agriculture. First it was soy, and now it's cattle, and I mean, it's a lot of, it's, if you come into this with a North American idea of what the Amazon is going to be like, and then you drive down one of the Amazonian highways, it's astonishing. You're oh, actually, it was the most intensive agriculture I had ever seen. It is,
Bakersfield, California.
Yeah, or I don't know, Iowa. I was on a reporting trip in Iowa once where, even that farm machinery, it's Tonka trucks that have been it's so big, and you just think, oh, and I'm in the middle of the Amazon rainforest, right? It's just, that's all that continues to be subsidized even by the current Brazilian government with its nominal commitments to.
And they have a lot of power in the Congress.
Yeah.
Right now, that's the problem.
Yeah.
Right. So the book suggests that the current administration, and if there is a villain in this, it's probably Bolsonaro, who comes up repeatedly in the book. But the new administration is not, according to what I was reading, having as much success being able to get any kind of reforms through. And maybe they don't want to, but the book points to the Congress being the problem, that there's political opposition, that this is, even if the policy prescriptions were, they've made it to the point of legislation, but they're not getting passed. So this is what you were saying, it's a political problem. What do you think about that? Is Bolsonaro the villain of this story?
Well,
The story does not lack for villains.
Yeah. I think Bolsonaro embodies a mentality of extractivism, of the big green monster as your enemy, of a certain paranoid nationalism, and of this sense that we need to conquer nature and we deserve to conquer nature, and it's our right and our duty, and anyone who stands in our way is standing in the way of Brazil and the nation and my God-given right to conquer and destroy and profit. And that mentality is, if anything, I would say, is the villain. Because there are cattle farmers that don't believe in that, and yet they do it because of circumstances, and there are people that are doing agroforestry that would love to, open a big cattle ranch. And Bolsonaro he just pumped that mentality with steroids and really just let go, tried to cut all the restraints. And there's clearly
even the nominal control that existed,
exactly,
which was not strong. Look, Bolsonaro, right there, that's the moment. Bolsonaro has another level of culpability in this. This is a moment in 2019, where Bolsonaro hosted a gathering of foreign reporters, and Dom was given one of the first questions, and I think most of us think it was probably a setup, but he asked Bolsonaro about his policies on the Amazon, and Bolsonaro said, the Amazon is not...
It's ours.
Also.
It's not yours. Yeah.
Yeah, the Amazon is ours, not yours, and just released this tirade, which was sort of startling at the time, but it immediately appeared all over his social media and was widely cheered by his supporters as being a sort of excellent demonstration of Brazilian sovereignty, right? And it made Dom infamous in a way that he did not appreciate. And I think if we're going to talk about an environment of increasing danger for reporters, Bolsonaro didn't say go out and kill reporters, but he certainly created a climate of incredible hostility to journalists and normalized a level of violence in public discourse that helped create the environment where people who saw Dom and Bruno as interlopers felt like there would be impunity for killing them, right? I mean, you can draw the trajectory from the kind of discourse that Bolsonaro had both about the Amazon and people's right to destroy it, and also about journalists, to an environment where they can be killed for trying to tell a story.
And then after he was killed, what did Bolsonaro say? He said, they're adventurers and they shouldn't have been there.
It was an ill-advised adventure.
Yeah, just making it clear that this was always the through line from the very beginning. And Dom said that he felt that that act put a target on his back, because he'd just be in the middle of nowhere, absolutely middle of nowhere, and they'd be like, you're that guy that Bolsonaro told off and told him to shove it. You're that journalist. And when you're doing reporting on illegal mining or whatever, you don't want people to know you. You don't want people to identify you as a journalist, because that could be very dangerous.
A journalist who's been identified as an agent of a foreign power,
yes,
with a ridiculous narrative of how you should protect the Amazon and not let people earn their livelihoods, right? He'd been branded an enemy, a state enemy. It's not...
And I think it's controversial because when Don and Bruno was disappeared, there is no effective from army or to find them.
Yeah, it's where this initiative began, was in the community of people who our very first response was, and for a lot of us who had reported there, like you always hoped, I think everyone's first reaction was, God, there but for the grace of God go I, right? Because how many of us had these moments where, and you wanted to hope that your friends, I think that's why we had this informal system, right? Of if somebody went on a reporting trip like this, you made sure people had the numbers and knew where you were. And immediately the move was, how many high profile people can we get to say something public on social media about this, because without pressure, the Brazilian government was going to do nothing. Yeah. And even once they had been, it had been established that they'd been killed, then it was equally, there will be total impunity for this if we are not loud, because from Bolsonaro there was no recognition that this was, there was, as Ali says, there was no mobilization, and there was no there would never have been any kind of a criminal investigation at all, I don't think. Without, I don't know, do you think that's fair?
But I had the promise of indigenous team, the security team. They'd say to me, don't worry, we will not left the rainforest without Don and Bruno. Doesn't matter the time that it take, we will be looking for Don and Bruno. So in that moment, for me, the indigenous people had much more loyalty and well, it was amazing. And I had one amazing support of British Embassy as well, because there is a lot of fake news in that moment, and the British Embassy update every day with federal police information and talk to me to confirm the news, to confirm the updates. They are amazing. So I had my journalist team to me, my family, indigenous people, and the British government. Amazing.
But not the Brazilian government.
It's pretty clear that these guys they had beef with Bruno before. There had been some involvement. Do we think from the legal process that they knew they were after Dom as well? Or was it just whoever was in that boat with Bruno? Did they know he was a journalist?
It's not entirely clear, and there's an ongoing criminal case going on, but the best theory is that it was likely that they just didn't want any witnesses.
Of course, yeah.
And if you're with my enemy, then
Yeah.
you are my enemy.
Yeah. And did phones work there? Would they have been able to communicate?
They had a satellite GPS phone or tracker.
Just not enough time, probably.
Yeah, they were ambushed.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. I wanted to ask, in the book, there's a suggestion that World Resources Institute, I think it was, or one of those groups, had done a study about how much money it would take to stop deforestation, which is not to roll it back, which is another kind of more aggressive, difficult step, but to just hold it in place. And I think the monitoring cost of that and the incentives and all of the things that needed to be done, they put it something like $520 billion, which is a lot of money, but it does not seem like a lot of money when you read that at the COPE conference,
COP 30.
yeah, they were willing to maybe come up with about half of that, or so they were saying, among a small number of nations. So it's hard to know, but do you think any of those things are in the ballpark? Because it seems like a problem stopping deforestation. It seems like a problem that can be addressed if that's the resource that's required.
That's from my chapter. And if
Perfect.
you were to...
Sorry.
No, it's great. Thank you for reading it. And if you were to... I don't have the exact number off the top of my head right now, but it's hundreds of billions of dollars a year in damages, in externalized costs from the deforestation that happens now, from the extractive industries now. And it's $500 billion over 20 years to have a sustainable Amazonian economy, which includes in their plan actually more heads of cattle in the Amazon than there currently are. So this is like a compromise plan.
Yeah.
It's not saying you have to get rid of the current industries. It's finding new ways to do it. And there's debates over whether or not that's actually a viable strategy. But it's not a lot of money at all. I mean, you say $500 billion, it sounds like a lot, but $500 billion for a country the size of Brazil over the course of 20 years. I don't have the top of my head. It's like 0.2% of the GDP per year. It's just
It's like
nothing.
20 billion a year or something like
It's
that.
nothing. And you're losing, you're having these external costs that are much more than that in 2 to 3 years. Every 2 to 3 years, it's costing more, and every year that we wait, therefore, it's going to cost more to repair and to find this ready. And that's, if there's still time. If you wait too long, then no amount of money is going to fix it.
And deforestation, although it's been going on for a while, the acceleration is a fairly recent problem.
Yeah.
And I was really surprised by that. It's like this was a problem that was really taking off in the 80s and 90s, right? Which feels like right there, like we just did this, we just.
And I think like an exponentially larger rate from the early 2000s onward.
Yes, which accelerates the need for action now. But I mean, I just think of it as like a long-standing, problem. And I guess there's some ways it has been, but the tipping point, which Andrew was talking about, we've arrived at because of fairly recent bad policy.
Yeah, it's the industrial scale that Stephanie's talking about, right? Like there was extractive industry in the Amazon has been going on for centuries, but only now you have these massive Tonka trucks and these new methodologies that just, with mechanization, that you can just really do it at this scale and have the political support.
And it cycles through and feeds itself, right? So the dam you were referring to, the Billamonchi Dam, has generated a power supply that has also then allowed the mechanization of a lot of this industry. And you open up the waterways and you create facilities for just absolutely enormous shipping, then it starts to make the economics of extracting more like it just feeds itself, right? And that it starts in the 1960s with the Brazilian government sort of colonizing the Amazon aggressively supposedly as a defense strategy, but it still kicks up again in the 80s, and then much more 20 years later with really just large-scale industry in a way that you kind of can't fathom till you see it.
But you want to talk about like the first Lula years and what happened?
Yeah, you talk about that.
Okay. You were going so well, I think one of the things that gave Dom the hope to do the book and gave a lot of people hope that there is a way to save the Amazon is that in the early years of the first Lula administration, the early 2000s, they were able to reduce deforestation by 80% in 2 or 3 years. It's just massive cut through government policy. And
because they were serious about it, right? Because they tried, which then by default shows you subsequently that, they did it quickly and efficiently and with a fairly minimal investment of resources, right? Which then puts the lie to when it doesn't actually come down, it shows you fairly clearly that no one's trying, right? Sorry, no, carry on.
All while massively investing in agriculture. At the same time, they were making JBS, a national here that became now the biggest animal protein processor in the world. So they were able to balance the two things so that lie that, if you want to save the Amazon, then you're trying to kill Brazilian economy. It's just completely specious. And that's what we saw. And Dom's hope was, he died before this last election. He was hoping that if the new Lula administration came in, then hopefully they could use this furor that was driven during the Bolsonaro years of the outrage to actually do more long-lasting.
But he gave them license to make a lot of bold policy choices that, in fact, they've chosen not to make, right? Because of, as LA was saying, in part because agro-industry still controls Congress.
Yes.
Right. So.
And is that a function of campaign finance support, like we have that issue here, or how does that come into play? Are companies investing in the legislators?
Yes, this is would you like to do a doctoral thesis in Brazilian political dysfunction kind of a question, but the short answer is yes.
They have that issue, okay.
The rules are different, the methods are different, but it's money in politics, and it's not just that they are able to buy politicians or pay for their campaigns. A lot of the most prominent and powerful members of Congress are massive landowners, right? They are the people that are doing this. So it's a very direct relationship.
Yeah. And we have the narco traffic increasing these illegal activities.
Yeah.
I had I just wondered how, I think, Andrew, you had mentioned that that Dom would be recognized because of the dust up with the
Yes.
Bolsonaro. But what about the work that he was doing? Is this kind of journalism getting back to people who are living in the Amazon, because you've got issues about literacy and then dialect and all kinds of other things? Is the journalism finding its way back to people, or is the right way to think of it is he's reflecting what his sources are saying in that journalism? They know it before it's published, really. I just wondered about that. Like, is the product for Brazil the journalism product, or is it for us?
It depends on what you do, right? I mean, I run a Brazilian newsroom. We currently have 30 active lawsuits against us. And it's often because the people that we are reporting on want to make sure that we stop.
Yeah.
Because we've had many cases where you report on a story, and then we had a case in the Amazon. There's this gang that was doing illegal extraction of pebbles and rocks that they were using for industrial purposes and for selling for gardening, whatever. And they've been doing this for 20 or 30 years, just with complete impunity. Everybody knew it. Nothing happened. We did a story, and 2 days later, the civil police come in, swoop in, and they break down they lock down the gang, they light their barges on fire, and they ended it. I mean, journalism can have the power to have very quick and immediate impact. And when that happens, when you get the right story with the right potential for impact, you really can have quite immediate results. And that's one of the wonderful things about doing journalism in Brazil, that while there's lots of challenges and difficulties, it's also can be very rewarding in a way that it's very hard. It's a lot easier to get a senator on the phone in Brazil than it is in Washington.
Yeah.
I've tried to do both places, and Brazil, you just like get them on WhatsApp, and it's just like, hey, yeah, I'll talk to you. What's up? I've never met you before. Here, not so much. And so when that sort of thing happens, you can really shake up an entire community, for better or for worse, depending on your reporting and what you do. And so, yeah, that's why we do what we do. Sometimes you just need to get the word out and more of the setting the scene. But in the book, Dom had a scoop that he was hoping to publish that ended up losing its timing about illegal cattle deforestation. That he was hoping was going to create a stir and hopefully lead to some sort of pressure for the government to act. And that's what you aim for, right?
So you're experiencing lawfare in opposition to some of your stuff, frivolous lawsuit. And that's not uncommon for the U.S. Audience,
Sure.
I mean, the journalism as well. What about, is online harassment the same as it would be in the U.S.?
Oh, yeah.
And what about just safety? You have how many journalists in your newsroom? 30 something?
We staff of 25. We have about 15 journalists.
Safety is an issue for them, or no?
Yeah.
Physical safety?
Well, I mean, our journalism is a bit exceptional, and we've had a lot of threats in our time. We have one journalist that has a sentence of a year in prison for writing the truth about a judge that the judge didn't like, and his buddy decided to rule in his favor. Completely spurious, and we'll fight it. Hopefully she won't have to serve any time in prison, but there's that. We got a reporter 2 months ago, that was his family's addresses were doxxed, and a lot of death threats, and because he was reporting on pro-Bolsonaro supporters that did the January 8th invasion of the Capitol, and were convicted of lighting a police car on fire, and then fled to Argentina, and we exposed And that led to the whole network of the Bolsonaristas, and that's very common. I mean, what happened to Dom is very much the same playbook, right?
So Eliana Boom, who's a great Brazilian journalist who contributed a chapter to the book, when you ask the question, like, do the stories get back? Eliana has been, lives in the Amazon and has been directly threatened by people in her community, because even though sometimes she is writing for foreign audiences, word does get back and they know what she's reporting on, and they know, and it makes her a target locally. Like others of us, like me, like I went in, I went out, I very rarely went back to the same place. But now there's a default, because of this antagonism we were talking about before, there's a default level of suspicion of journalists. So you show up looking like me with my very badly accented Portuguese, and people say you're a reporter, people's opening assumption is that you're not on their side, right? That you're there to manipulate the truth of what they're doing and make them look bad or get them in trouble.
A lot of people, it's not always. Sometimes you get the exact opposite.
Yeah,
but
no, that's fair. Yeah.
the people who are usually getting, they're threatened on the ground and their lives are in danger, when you show up in their community, they're like,
Yeah.
They're happy
this
to
is
have you.
amazing.
Yeah.
No, they're very happy to
Finally.
see you,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I was struck by in the chapters in the beginning, the ones that Dom authored primarily by himself. He makes several references to journalists that have been. It's not the central part of what he's saying, but he makes several references to journalists that have been killed or harassed, and these are not necessarily incidents that I knew about, or that they hadn't really kind of made it out of there. But it was the number of times he was referring to this, and it had to be on his mind. So I just realized that that's why I'm asking these kind of questions. I wanted to know what is it like for people who are trying to do journalism in Brazil and in the Amazon. And you're doing a good job telling me. I'm not.
Everyone's looking at me. It's hard, and I had many conversations with Dom about this during the Bolsonaro years when he was thinking about doing the book, and he was very concerned about the rising level of threats that were happening with journalists and how it was becoming this hostile environment. And he said, somebody's going to die. And I was like, yeah, well, Brazil's one of the most dangerous places for journalism in the world. But that's usually like, it's local reporters.
In high conflict areas.
High conflict areas that have like very little protection visibility. And so like, we should like calm down a little here. Like, you're a foreigner with blue eyes. If you go into the Amazon, people can say, like, I don't want to. Messing with this guy is me more trouble than it's worth. So maybe they'll like give you a threat and tell you to leave, but they're not actually going to really
It's the
do
thing
anything.
that we always count on to protect us, right?
Yeah.
Is that if you look foreign, then they're going to
Different
assume that
treatment.
it's going to be a hassle.
Yeah.
They're not going to kill me because there will be attention.
Exactly.
And you won't just get away with it, which of course is probably if Bruno had been murdered alone, right? There never would have been the same level of attention, which I think Don would have hated.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. He would have hated that it was the blue eyes.
Yeah. But when I said that to him, his response was, no, you're wrong. Because when you're deep in the jungle and you're, with sources and whatever, the people that are likely to be messing with you aren't, the higher ups that are financing the operation. It's some guy who like possibly is illiterate, has never heard of The Guardian or The Washington Post or whatever, and just doesn't really have the same frame of reference that you're thinking with. So like, that doesn't apply, and it is actually quite dangerous for everyone. And unfortunately, he was right and I was wrong.
Yeah.
This would be a good time for me to ask if you have questions on cards and you want to pass them up. I'll take a look. Thank you so much. Thank you for the good handwriting. Okay. So this is a question about what are the most effective strategies for protecting the Amazon. I think we did go through some of that. Before we kind of get to that one of the things that surprised me was in the first 3 or 4 chapters, the number of sources that Dom had who were the leader of an organization with a long acronym, and the civil society, the level of civil society in the Amazon seemed to be extraordinary, that there were a lot of groups, a lot of seemingly new groups that were aiming at trying to do something inventive, to help. Now, am I off there, or is that the way things?
32 million people, right?
Yeah.
So there's going to be a lot of organizations.
Yes.
There's going to be there's a lot of different political perspectives and but there are.
It suggests a high level of organization, though, that these things are founded and they have a structure and they seem to have been in place for a while. I mean, some of it was fairly ad hoc, like the sisters, was she a nun?
Dorothy Strange.
Dorothy, yeah.
Dorothy Stein.
Yeah. And she was quite a character. Why don't you tell a little bit about Dorothy?
Well, actually, I think that these people that is living in this front line, it's a kind of mission of life, And Don went to talk with Sister Jane.
Yeah.
Sister Jane worked with Sister Dorothy. And don't say to me, Ale, this is a crazy life. They have to protect themselves all the time. They can't go out to the land. They have this strict movement around the land. So many threats, just increasing all the time. And I think that he had no, how can I explain this? He had this in his mind, this idea to be in this front line.
Mm-hmm.
When we had an opportunity to live in Belém do Pará, it's in the middle of Amazon, and he said to me, Ale, I think it's not possible. Because I'm writing a lot about farmers, and I think that I'm not secure, and you neither. So I think it's a choice, but it's really complicated too.
Yeah, the detail that he said about when he was talking about that with me, about the possibility, he said, I was hanging out with all these environmental protectors and activists in Belém. They try not to go to the bar like out in the street, and if they do, they don't sit with their back to the street. And I don't want to live like that while I'm writing this book, and that's why I chose not to.
Yes.
This questioner, who I think wants to be a journalist, or maybe just starting, what is some advice you would give to a journalist working in risky conditions like those that we're describing here? You guys can take a crack at that, but what I would say is that in reading the book and reading the situation about Dom's situation, they knew it was a risky, there were risky conditions, but I think they seem to be following exactly the practices, that they should follow. So the point about that is, I'm not sure that we can say prescriptively, this is what you'll do and you'll be 100% good. Every big news organization has some kind of safety training. It's awareness as much as anything, and it's experience. And Dom had a ton of experience about how to operate in these areas. And he was with a very knowledgeable, river guide person, Bruno. So I don't know that we can say what you would do differently. these are why I was asking the questions. What kind of comms did they have? And they were following a check-in regimen, which is pretty standard protocol for people who are working in the field in difficult circumstances. Did you guys want to say anything more about any of this?
You're the boss, man. You've done this for 30 years, we've learned.
I would agree with that assessment. I think they did everything right, and you just, that's what when I said there. But for the grace of God, I mean, they were doing all the things that I would tell anybody to do.
Yeah. If you're a young journalist that's interested in doing this sort of work, I would say don't rush in head first. It's something that you do need to have experience and build up. It's always good to have either your first times that you're going out, go with a more seasoned reporter that knows the ropes. If you can find great, trustworthy local sources that you're traveling with, oftentimes there's support organizations that are helping people on the front lines that they themselves may have even been journalists, but they will know how to keep you safe. You want to check with the best practices of the more senior journalists. One of the great things about Dom was that whenever new reporters came in, he would always give them time, go out to lunch, answer questions, and talk about security protocols. Actually, when I was revising our newsroom's protocols, I called him up to do a talk to look at some best practices. Every big newsroom has a security assessment sheet that you do before a trip that to decide whether or not it's safe to actually go, and then also talks about the best practices. But these situations are very localized. They change, the dynamics change very quickly. I mean, even if you're like going to some, an urban area with, gun violence, one neighborhood could be safe one week, and then the next week the security situation is totally changed. So you need to be listening to the people that are living that experience. You need to be making sure that you're following all the best practices and that you're taking the lead from other people that have been more experienced and work your way up.
That's all good. Thank you. Question about the status of the criminal cases. Does anyone want to bring us up to speed on those?
I'll answer that for Alay so she doesn't have to. The perpetrators have been arrested and indicted. There's an ongoing trial. There's 3 of them. 2 are now in house arrest. One's pretrial detention. There's the 5 people that helped with hiding the bodies. They've also been indicted. And now on the 3rd anniversary, the boss, the local boss, has been finally indicted for his role. Brazilian justice system is very slow. It's very, it sort of follows its own whims.
Baroque.
Yes, some might say. And so it's always a very drawn out and painful process to seek justice. And that's the situation that's currently in. I think Alay's lawyers are buckled down for a long fight, and this is one of the big problems, right? Because as long as there's a sense of impunity, then that's what encourages people to do what they do. I mean, that's why people are doing so much deforestation, illegal deforestation, because they just know that it's very unlikely that they're going to get caught. If they do get caught, maybe it's going to be a fine.
Not going to matter. They're
probably not going to pay the fine. Eventually, there might be some sort of amnesty. There was a mass amnesty that was done under Dilma. President Dilma. So, Dom's case, Bruno's case, was international headlines and forced the police to act. There was a federal police officer that was killed there before. The case is still open. There's lots of people that are killed, land defenders, ambushed, and the homicide solve rate in these situations is very, very low. And that's what justice would look like to me, making it so that it's harder for the next person who wants to do a situation like this, makes them think twice and make them feel that there is not this broad impunity. And that's unfortunately a very difficult uphill battle right now.
Thank you. I'll keep that for the last question. Is Kevin Hall here? Kevin, I see your question, but I can't read it. So can you?
Yes, I was going to say that it was more a commentary than a question, but I am the version of you guys from 20 years before you. So I was on the Xingu River writing about modern slavery, and you may know my byline, maybe you don't. I know Andrew. We've worked with the Intercept at OCCRP. It's kind of depressing to see how little has changed, because in my case, I had right in the same area that Dom was, and it was, they created after our reporting about, they were killing people from Maranhão, Piauí, and disposable people basically for land clearing. We traced it into the food chain, which I think is something that can be done again today in the reporting. I don't think that's stopped. Telling people where these products end up in our food chain. Fluorine, Jatobá is sold as something else, Brazilian cherry usually. They don't call it what it is, and it comes in under eucalyptus with false billing and stuff like that. But the heartening thing in this, and I think Andrew's got the greatest beat in the world right now, because you're doing it in a time where you've got the technology. And I would have killed to have had the technology you have now, the ability. In my time frame, Raytheon was putting in the towers that was going to give the ability for Brazil to check in real time, the ability to stop deforestation. Marina Silva was the first minister started using that, and it came to a grinding halt.
Kevin, you're not on a mic, so if you can ask a short question, then these guys can answer.
Yeah, so the question really is for Andrew. Where do you see the ability with these, for technology to allow NGOs and nonprofit newsrooms to better access areas that are difficult to access? You can get information now that you just simply couldn't do before. How are you harnessing that?
Sure. Well, there's legislation that I write about in my chapter coming from the EU that's forcing supply chain. They want to force all companies who are importing from the Amazon to have supply chain monitoring done in a way that is standardized and mandatory. And if they do not, if they're caught not adhering to the principles, then they can be fined a percentage of their total sales in the EU, which is something that's, that could be hundreds of millions of euros, possibly even billions, depending if it's Cargill. And that is something that a use of technology that can really move the reality. There's a former investment banker that I quote in the chapter that said that the only way that this is ever going to change is if you have to impact the bottom line, right? So that technology, a lot of it's satellite tracking, and it's very expensive. It's not the sort of thing that I can purchase from my newsroom, but it is the sort of thing that governments and government scale civil society organizations can fund. And the Norwegians put a lot of money into the satellite tracking systems, the capabilities for that. And that's something that's really important and something that journalists use quite frequently. They get access to this information as well. And it is a mechanism that the journalism can ensure that it is being utilized, that it is being, that they're being held to the proper account. They're not finding loopholes to it to ensure that the technology is being done in the right way. And also another technology piece is, love them or hate them, Starlink has definitely changed the communication dynamic in the Amazon. There's a lot more connectivity. And as Ale was talking about with her work at Don Phillips Institute, trying to find resources to train the next generation of indigenous leaders and activists and media. There's some really incredible media initiatives from young indigenous people that are trying to circumvent people like us because they don't need us and they shouldn't need us. We serve a role. Sometimes, if it's Stephanie, then it's a good role. There's certain reporters certain subjects of reporting would say that they didn't help. They did quite the opposite. But that's another thing that's been quite amazing. There's right now this is relatively new phenomenon where there's these indigenous young kids that are jumped on TikTok and now have millions of followers and are doing an incredible job of making this foreign, exotic, mystical land. You know, the Amazon is just as foreign to most Brazilians as it is to most Americans. But they do speak Portuguese there, like they do in the rest of Brazil. And so they're getting this intimate look into the daily lives of indigenous communities, and it's humanizing after so much of government narratives, a lot of media narratives locally and internationally have been dehumanizing. And I think that's been something that's really powerful and important and hopeful in a moment when we know that the media's trust in the media and its reach has been declining. These social media platforms has been increasing, and these people, and that's why it's so great that LA's choosing to do this work and trying to get the resources and training they need, are being able to use it.
Let's talk about that a little bit. Just as our last thing, you mentioned the institute or an institute for Dom. And Ali, can you tell us, there's a foundation or an institute, how can people support this?
Well, giving us money.
Yeah?
Simple, like this. Yes, because we have this project to work with youth from Amazon. And first moment we are in the Vale do Javari, Javari Valley, working with indigenous communicators to strengthen the communication with the communities, with outside, but they really demanding a good education development to strengthen the indigenous movement, and they want to be protagonists, as Andrew say, because they want to anticipate the problem. One indigenous leader said to me, "We don't want to defend the land after one problem happened. We want to anticipate. So to anticipate, we want to be in the judicial system. We want to be lawyers. We want to be judge. We want to be journalists. There is a lot of indigenous youths working with cinema. So they say now our weapon is the communication." And
Great.
I think this is amazing.
Yes, that is a great story. Send us more about that. We'll post that to our website so people will know how to learn more about it.
Yes.
So we've been talking about How to Save the Amazon by Dom Phillips. Thank you all for being here. Thanks to the panel, Stephanie, Andrew. Thank you so much, Alessandro. So nice to have you here.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.